Hello and welcome to 60 Minutes or Less, a podcast from Birthday Cake for Breakfast. I'm Andy Hughes and what a treat it is to be putting out our 30th episode. To mark the occasion, this episode features a chat with J. Willgoose Esquire, band leader and instrumentalist auteur in the brilliant public service broadcasting. Described on their very own website as Masters of Conceptual Pop Historiography, for 15 years public service broadcasting have been crafting conceptual pieces on subjects such as the highest peaks of Everest, societal struggles via Britain's coal industry, and the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union, utilising archived material from NASA, the BFI and more. Concept records never seem to go out of fashion, and over the past decade the band have had 4 records in the official albums chart top 20, 3 of which landed in the top 5. Their latest album, The Last Flight, released October 2024 via So Recordings, concerns Amelia Earhart and the final voyage of America's pioneering female aviatrix. Featuring turns from This Is the Kit and Andreya Casablanca, the record came about with the band wanting to do a woman-focused story, given most of the archived material they have access to is overwhelmingly male. Ahead of their forthcoming March 2025 tour, we caught up with J. Willgoose Esquire over Zoom to discuss the record and the history of the band, as well as playing and working with the likes of James Dean Bradfield and what goes into the making of a public service broadcasting record over the years. As ever, if you like the episode, let us know. Follow us on your favourite streaming platform and follow Birthday Cake for Breakfast on all the socials. Right, on to J. Willgoose Esquire. Enjoy.
There we go. How are we doing?
Good. I like that. I like seeing how the magic works.
Yeah, sorry for the slight late appearance, but I was like, oh yeah, that won't take long, and then I forgot the mic had been put away and blah blah blah.
All good. How do we find you? Are you in a rush today, or is everything pretty chill?
You know, it's not one of the more manic periods of band existence, I suppose. So yeah, it's fairly relaxed today. Yeah. How about you?
Good. Yeah, all good here. Cheers. In sunny Manchester, it's so dark outside.
I know the last couple of days, it's like it's not even tried, isn't it?
No. Are you down in London?
Yeah, Southeast London. Yeah.
Oh, cool. So I don't want to spoil it for the listeners, but as with our interview with Reagan Bush from Chatpile, I was gutted to find out that J. Willgoose Esquire isn't actually your real name.
Well, it is the real name of the entity that you're talking to right now, is what I'll say. And I will say no more on it. So try and preserve a bit of a mystery and enigma. You know, it's a real family name. It's the surname's in my family for a couple of generations ago. And yeah, it was George Willgoose was my great uncle. He died at Dunkirk, which is kind of what led to me writing the War Room, actually. So it feels like an appropriate moniker for PSB anyway.
Right, yeah, that's interesting, and obviously taking on that family name and continuing on.
Yeah, it felt right to me anyway. Yeah, definitely.
Definitely, I'm just glad that it wasn't one of those names that was plucked out of nowhere and assigned. You know, at least it's got something to it.
Yeah.
So the last time we saw you as in the band was at Night and Day Cafe in Manchester.
Oh right, okay, yeah.
Yeah, and we were nipping to the loo and almost bumped into you all as you were doing your team huddle right before you went on, because obviously there's no disconnect, is there, between going to the loo and the backstage being right there.
Is it downstairs there? Is that where it is? Or
downstairs?
I can't remember,
yeah.
I mean, team huddle doesn't sound very much like us. We don't really have any kind of pre-gig rituals or anything. We don't do like a big hug or anything. But maybe we're like, have fun, see you later. Okay, yeah, good one, bye.
There was a definite circle at least, and some talking, but yeah,
a coincidental circle, we'll call it. Yeah.
But you're used to playing these big rooms and these massive festivals, whereas for the uninitiated, the Night and Day Cafe is, a much more intimate venue. How did you find playing these outstores last year in these more intimate, smaller venues?
Well, I think the bigger rooms are the weirder ones, really. We're used to, as people who've been in bands since we're, since school age, we're used to playing those kind of gigs. In fact, smaller than that probably. I was plugging away for years without anybody paying any attention to anything I was doing. So I think the bigger they get, the weirder and more kind of abstract they get. You can be standing on stage at some of the really big ones, like we've done some support slots and arenas and sort of stadiums, and you're just looking around thinking, oh, this is big, isn't it? And you're not really actually there, if you see what I mean. Whereas you don't have a choice in a venue like Night and Day Cafe or the Bull and Gate or Buffalo Bar, or any of the ones, Soup Kitchen as well is the first place I remember playing in Manchester. You don't really have a choice of not being there because people are right up in your face if there's enough of them there to actually turn up to watch you. So yeah, I'd say we're more used to that than the larger ones still, even though it's we're lucky to have had a fairly long career now as far as they go in this industry.
Definitely. And in terms of that, these massive support slots, I didn't see the show, but I saw that you supported Manic Street Preachers when you were in Trentham Gardens. Have
Yeah,
there
yeah.
been any over that, lifetime, particularly in more recent years, where you have found yourself in one of these incredibly large stages and just, felt so, yeah, like in a strange position? Any particular?
Yeah, doing I mean, we just before the Race for Space came out, we were on a support tour with Kaiser Chiefs, and the first gig we did there was Liverpool Arena, and it was by far the biggest room we'd played in. Just really odd, and when we got down to London for the big London show at the O2, or the Millennium Dome as I insist on calling it, it was just weird. Just stood on stage playing and just looking all the way to the back and thinking, God, those people are so far away, like. Obviously, they're not there to watch the support, but you think when the main band does come on, you're like, what kind of experience are they actually getting here? Like, it can't be great. So yeah, it was a really interesting experience doing some of those larger shows and just kind of working out, what we want to do, the kind of things that we're comfortable with as a band. And I think, a big enough stage to be able to put on some of the production that we like to be able to, but not so big that you're kind of totally divorced from or removed from the action. It felt like it'd be really hard to make those rooms work on a human level.
Yeah, it's less one on one, isn't it? And more one on however many thousands
I,
and
I think it's 17,000 here too, or is it between 12 and 17? I think depending on the setup. Yeah,
right. Blimey.
it's just weird. It's a weird business anyway, but that's really towards the weirder end of it. It's not normal.
On that, in the way of shows and such, we went to a show late last year in Berlin, and I was interested in your Berlin voyage when you were out there to record and write your previous record, Bright
Hmm.
Magic, where you even got the chance to do some, on-site recording of like local electrical currents and interference and stuff like that. You'd said when you were going out there to stay over there that, it kind of felt inevitable for you somehow to go out there and do this. Outside of the non-meat options, how was the experience out there in Berlin?
It's kind of clouded after the fact by how difficult it was to make and tour that record because of COVID. The first thing that comes to mind whenever anyone talks about the album is just like, oh my God, that was not a fun time to be trying to tour anything, and it has coloured my view of the record slightly after the fact, which is a real shame because I was really proud of that album and really happy with it. But touring in 2021 and 2022 kind of almost broke us financially and sort of spiritually, I'd say. So it's really difficult to have an objective view of the album and to just sort of take myself back to being in Berlin in what seemed like a kind of more innocent time, I suppose. Yeah, it was. I think I underestimated how isolated I'd feel moving to a foreign city on my own. Essentially, I had my wife with me for 2 or 3 months, but for most of the time I was on my own. And I knew a few people, had a few friends, and made a few more. But it's quite an isolating experience. And even though my German was okay, and even though English is spoken by most people, but certainly not everyone, especially on the kind of bureaucratic side. It was just easy to feel kind of isolated and kind of cut off from sort of daily conversations and daily life. It was a really interesting kind of thing to do at that age in life, just to appreciate how it feels to be a bit of a fish out of water again. And that's as a European in a European city. So it just kind of it opened my eyes a bit to the experiences a lot of people are having moving around the world.
It's interesting because doing something like that, there's a certain romantic nature to it, isn't there? Traveling to this
Yeah.
different country and living there and such. Has that kind of possibly put you off any similar ideas for future projects, maybe, moving to a different country or what have you?
I think it probably has, but also my personal circumstances have changed in that I've got two young children now, and moving me plus a dog plus my wife kind of semi-commuting occasionally was a lot easier than it would be with with nippers now, especially now that one of them's in school and so forth. So yeah, I think the travelling days of sort of relocating are probably done for now, and I just have to rely on my imagination again, sat here in southeast London.
It's not, yeah, it's not quite the way you can take kids out of school when it's just dad's album to record and write.
Yeah, I mean, it was a logistical headache anyway, to be honest, because I didn't really have much help sorting it all out. There was a lot to take care of. I had some people who were very generous in helping me kind of find spaces and find places to work and live. But yeah, I didn't have like Coco Schwab just sorting me out a lovely apartment in Schöneberg and just the free run of Hansa 3 or 4 years, whatever Mr. Bowie had. Yeah, it was. I'm glad I did it, but I'm also glad that I am not going to do it again in the near future. I'd say.
It's interesting to hear you say that about, it kind of because of the way COVID was and the financial implications and such of what occurred with the previous record. Was it quite gratifying then to go on to this next project with The Last Flight and for it to be received as it has been, after all that's been with COVID and to get more of a better run at it with touring and such?
Yeah, it's felt like it's had a much fairer crack of the whip, really. And it's probably, narratively, it's a much more straightforward record, so it's probably easier for people to get their hooks into. So, ironically, if you could have released this record without touring it and toured Bright Magic to the extent we wanted to, I think, they might have ended up relatively kind of even keel. But if there was an album that people really needed to kind of be in and amongst an experience and kind of feel the full force and sound and vision of, it probably was Bright Magic and on that tour. So yeah, I think it's an easier one to get your head around. It's an easier kind of concept and narrative to explain and for people to probably get into. But yeah, it was funny because we put the tour on sale in April and we didn't put any music out until July. Manchester sold out in a day, and I got in trouble actually for saying in the mail out that we do. Oh, don't worry if you don't get tickets on the first day because we don't sell that quickly. You'll be able to get one whenever. Management told me off, said, don't forget booking agents read these emails. I said, oh yeah, sorry. And then, then it sold like the clappers anyway. We were like 45% sold after one day of general sale, which when we went out on tour, I think in 22 for Bright Magic, we were 56% when we were leaving the door to go out and, try and tour. So just wildly different and without even having released any music. So I think it was a real, the way the album was received was kind of a bit of a cherry on top of that, but I think just the underlying support that we had that had been distorted to a magnitude we knew it had been distorted by COVID, but I think we severely underestimated how much it had really scuppered us. It was just nice to see that kind of groundswell coming back and so enthusiastically. It was it was very comforting after after a few years of very challenging times.
Yeah, I imagine putting yourself back into those shoes after the back of COVID and such must be quite a worrying prospect anyway.
What do you mean in terms of?
Just putting yourself out there in terms of, like obviously the record previous one was well received as well, but just, knowing that you're going back out there and you've had all this experience off the back of COVID, not knowing, I know we're more
Hmm.
like in the clear these days with, the infection
Well,
rates.
I mean, yeah, but you can get insurance now. You can insure a tour. So if somebody gets ill and the tour can't go ahead, you're not going to be as we would have been. If one of us had been stricken with COVID on day one of the first tour in 2021, the tour wasn't insured because you couldn't insure it for COVID. If we'd been incapable of performing because of COVID, we would have lost between 100 and 150,000 pounds, I think, which is quite terrifying because we can't afford to lose that much money. So we were just sort of like, I remember sitting there at the rehearsal room before leaving and thinking, why are we doing this? This is absolutely insane. I mean, I love playing music. I love being on a stage and playing our music to people who are receptive to it. It's the biggest privilege you can have as a musician, I think. But yeah, it was a mad thing to do, and we were really lucky to get through it without losing losing people before we lost Mr. B before we went to Europe. he came down with COVID the day we were supposed to go to Amsterdam. So I was frantically re-editing videos on the way over on the ferry, etc. But yeah, we still managed to get through to the end of a pretty short run. But it's just mad. And obviously we just don't have that hanging over us now. You know, disaster could happen at any point, but it would be a rescheduling or something. It wouldn't be kind of, you know, just financial ruin essentially, which is what we were looking at then. It's just terrifying. But there you go.
And I'm touching on what you said before about, the theme of this record. I found it interesting that, it's that presentable to people, so much so that Laurie Anderson put out a record about Amelia Earhart as well. Was that, around the same time as well? Was that a bit of an onion in the ointment for the band hearing that she was doing similar, or?
Well, I heard about it. The first time I heard about it was when the biography for this record was being written. You know, you update your, the blurb for the band at the start of every album campaign. And so Ian Harrison, who's the journalist who's written that for us for several years now, just phoned me up to have a chat. And he was like, "Oh, isn't it funny how Laurie Anderson's got a record at the same time?" I was like, "Has she?" Like, yeah, all about Amelia Earhart. And I was like, "Oh, right. Yeah, that is funny. But it won't be about her final flight. That's, so we're the only ones doing that." And he was like, no, it is." And I was like, "Oh, God." And it, it did take the wind out of my sails a bit because suddenly you realise yet again you're not as interesting or original a person as as you like to hope you are. It's not like it was. I don't know. There's not that many bands, I suppose, like us with such a heavy kind of conceptual kind of leaning, but we're in very different worlds. Us and Laurie Anderson. She's kind of more contemporary classical / really kind of pushing the boundaries still. Absolutely fantastic in her field, but I think it is a separate field to what we're trying to do. So there's definitely room enough for the two of us, and in a way, it just speaks to how kind of resonant Amelia's story is all this time later. But yeah, quite a coincidence. It's within 2 months of each other. Yeah, quite a coincidence.
With the record itself and the concept, I read that you wanted to consider this time around a woman-focused story because with with the archive that you have access to, it's overwhelmingly male. So when you go into, picking out moments in history and thinking about a concept for a record, what is it that goes into that consideration outside of, that you wanted to focus on a woman-focused story?
The best way I can kind of try to describe it is each record is a bit of a reaction to or even against the one that came before it. And I think that starts to make sense of kind of the slightly sort of zigzag way that we've moved through our albums. So, the Race to Space was a bit of a reaction to the kind of scattershot nature of Inform, Educate, Entertain. It was a much more serious record about serious subjects. Not that it didn't have its kind of moments of levity like Gagarin, but it was dealing with much more kind of narrative structure. And then Every Valley was, kicking against that. It was kind of removing superheroes and kind of, boys' own adventures and really kind of focusing on something much more down to earth, literally, in coal mining, and something much more socially challenging and a more kind of politically sensitive thing for us to cover. Bright Magic again moved away from that. It was not even really working with samples anymore, and 90% of the record is in German. So it was really kind of pushing against the boundaries of the concept of the band and the kind of stuff we could do. And I think having kind of pushed it that far out, you're then in a position to be able to say, like, okay, maybe we can kind of focus on a more traditional story next, because we've kind of we've shown people like what you can do with this, maybe what you can't do with it, but we've shown people what we're ambitious enough to kind of aim to do with it. And it's not just going to be the same record after the same record after the same record. Let's try and do something a bit more kind of narrative focused, but with the twist that going into the album, I knew that we didn't have the archive we needed kind of contemporary, because it just didn't exist. It wasn't recorded. So we would have to recreate it ourselves. And that would mean kind of writing almost like a script for the record and getting actors in and producing and directing those actors and trying to make it sound authentically 1930s, which was a big headache and a big worry. And the fact that so few people have commented on it on the actual record is hopefully testament to the fact that we sort of did all right with it. Yeah, some people don't even realize they're not kind of genuine clips. They're recreated.
I must admit, if I had not looked into the process, with the research for this interview today, I wouldn't have noted, because it is that bang on in terms of the audio. So with your previous releases, you've gone to old audio that's duffed up and you've worked your magic and made it sound presentable. Whereas with this, obviously, you've gone for actual recently recorded audio that you've done yourself and then duffed it up as somewhat to
Yeah.
make it sound like it's, found footage or what have you. So how was that switch in terms of doing that? And do you think that maybe opens things up in future for future projects where you might not have the archive material?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was one of the reasons for doing it was, there isn't a wealth of kind of woman-focused material in the broader archives of the world. So let's just make our own. And if we can do that, then we can take it anywhere. I think all the records are kind of experiments with what we can do with public service broadcasting as a concept, what we can do with the records. It might have been slightly less obvious with this one because they ended up blending into it quite well. But making that leap to we are not reliant on, you know, actually finding and licensing and manipulating kind of the original audio, we can kind of create it and dictate the course of the record a bit more ourselves. The stuff that's on the record is either based on stuff that she was saying, or newspaper articles, or some of her earlier writing, kind of spoken kind of quotes in newspapers and that kind of thing. Some of her poetry. So it's kind of still based on reality. There's not too many kind of creative liberties taken with it. I'm not just making stuff up and chucking it in there, but being able to kind of create the audio ourselves and do it in a believable and not rubbish way. That was my big fear, was it was going to sound like the Archers or something. No disrespect to the Archers. But yeah, I was just, knowing that we can do that now, yeah, we can. I've always said the only limit to this really is the imagination, and this kind of record by record, I'd like to think we're kind of proving that that is the case. You could make anything. You could make a record out of anything with this band, I think. Yeah. So, yeah, that's what I think.
I can feel the percentage of your fan base drifting away with the Archers comment. I think you've really.
No, the music is absolutely incredible. But my wife listens to it, and it just sounds like a compendium of sighing to me. I just hear like varieties of. You could edit the Archers down to just sighing noises, I'm sure. Yeah, it's not for me, but not to say it's not the actual, it's the height of its genre, etc., etc. But yeah, it's not one for me to listen to, certainly.
Nicely saved. The actual you were saying about, picking up on stuff that she'd actually said and stuff that she'd actually written and such. I like the line that you'd posted where she countered a question from a reporter about asking her why flying. And she said, why would a man ride a horse? And the reporter just answered, because he wants to, I guess. And you can even imagine him shrugging. Was there anything from her reading, from her writings and her poetry and previous interviews and stuff that you particularly enjoyed uncovering when you were doing the project?
Yeah, honestly, I mean everything about her. Yeah, she had a kind of gracefulness and charm to her that enabled her to answer such witless questions over and over and over again, and kind of put people in their place, but do it in a way with a smile, so they probably didn't realize how their kneecaps had just kind of been taken off. But yeah, she had to put up with so much nonsense. I mean, I think anybody in that kind of position, Mallory's famous quote is just born of boredom and frustration of being asked the same thing over and over again. Why am I climbing it? It's because it's there. Like, why do you think? Just stop asking me daft questions. And she's kind of dealing with the same thing, but she's got all the added weight and pressure of, why are you doing all this as a woman? You're a woman, you shouldn't be doing these kind of things, or it's not normal for women to be doing these kind of things. Therefore, why are you doing them? And why are you doing them while being a woman? Heinous crime of doing things while female. And she just countered it all brilliantly. And she had a kind of lyrical and poetic nature. She wrote poetry, she read poetry, she quoted poetry in French without sounding pretentious, which I think is the height of literary achievements for anyone.
Incredibly difficult, yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult. But she just had that kind of side to her, and it was a real pleasure kind of digging into that and being able to bring some of that across onto the record in some of the more kind of meditative moments and just kind of showcase her personality. I think what she did kind of from a point of aviation was incredible, but I think she was even more remarkable as a person just by her own rights, So kind of getting to know her through her own words and through the words of others. Yeah, it was a real privilege spending that much time with her, really. Yeah. Obviously, it wasn't with her, but it felt like it was with her.
Is it kind of, rewarding in that respect then with researching a project such as this? Because you've gone on to say that of all the people you've written about, you had the deepest respect and admiration for her. So being able to develop that understanding further, and like you say, being with her throughout the record, is that so rewarding, for you as a writer and as a band?
Yeah, I think especially if you can communicate that onwards, because that's really all you're trying to do is kind of as a creative person in any line of work, I think you're just trying to find the thing that inspires you and find a way of communicating that inspiration to other people, and if you can, kind of removing your ego from the process, and having somebody as interesting as her on the other end of that chain obviously does a very good job of taking me almost entirely out of the picture, which is great for me. Yeah, it's one of the happiest kind of byproducts of the way we work, really, is being able to spend that much time on a particular topic and really get to grips with it, and just try and find a way to translate it so that people form similar bonds with it, hopefully. And I would love to think that there are young women out there listening to this, young girls listening to this in the back of the car with their parents, putting it on the stereo or whatever, and just kind of being inspired by her. That would be one of the best things we could possibly have done, I think, with our time.
And with the record itself, it landed in the top five in the UK official albums chart, as some of your previous records have as well. As well as this, with the fact that you'd hope that young girls and young women and women could get onto the concept of the record.
Young men as well, I should say, to be honest. Yeah, young men should be inspired to realise that,
Everyone really, yeah.
Yeah.
But when it comes to this sort of thing and this sort of looking into a concept for a record, are you ever conscious with a concept for a piece and how it's going to be taken in by a listenership?
Yeah, it was at the forefront of my mind with Every Valley because, like I said earlier, about the political sensitivity surrounding anything to do with coal mining in this country, in the UK, but also specifically in South Wales, and going into it as a South Londoner and not having any particular kind of family history with it. Although I was later told by my mum, we very much do have a family history with it. I just was ignorant of it. It was kind of at the forefront of my mind in terms of I want to do this the right way. I want to kind of speak to people there. I want to spend time there. Kind of almost embed ourselves in the community to record the album and make some real kind of links with the area and not be kind of, vampiric about it all and just taking the story that didn't belong to us, but kind of earn the right to tell it, really. So yeah, that's I suppose that's less about public perception and more about me and just wanting to do things the right way and wanting to feel comfortable with how I approach things. But I knew we were in for a bit of a shoeing from some quarters, even just covering that subject matter as a band. Yeah, so I wanted to make sure, for my own sake, that we did that in the right way. And looking at what I think I might do for the next album, I can already see a few ways that are going to be easy to kind of misconstrue or misunderstand what I'm intending to cover, and just thinking about the best ways to present it so that you're kind of heading some of those off, I suppose, at the pass rather than giving people rope to run with. Yeah, I want to make sure that people don't kind of get the wrong end of the stick in terms of the subject matter, but at the same time, you can't control how people are going to react to something, so you shouldn't spend too much time and energy on that.
Do you think it is easy for people to misconstrue concepts when you set out to embark on something like this?
I think especially if they're acting in bad faith, yeah, and just assuming that we're horrendous, awful people and just purely out of kind of personal advancement and don't care about anything to do with what we're covering. And, there are definitely people out there who feel that way towards us because music is a very kind of, people are very passionate about music. I'm very passionate about music, and the guys in the band know I have my own very strong opinions about artists and albums, and I don't expect people to react any differently to us. So there's definitely people out there who are ready to hate what we do and perfectly happy to do so when it arrives. Yeah, you really can't control that. I think all you can really control is whether or not you're happy with how you've approached it.
Just touching on what you said, I read something similar where I think you said a while back about, it's important for bands to have something to say, or at least it's important, if bands do have something to say, to actually have something other than surface level opinions, that they sing about. Is that something, even though you are talking about concepts and such with the records and looking back on history, Do you think that is important for the band and for yourself as a writer?
Well, in terms of being able to kind of speak, on more than a superficial level about what we're covering, or speak about it, or actually, the record speaks more than superficially, or
A bit of both, really. Just being able to not only put it out there, but having a voice yourself to actually put yourself across.
I think it helps if you can, defend yourself or advocate for yourself, in a coherent and persuasive manner, I suppose. But ultimately, you can't do that for, you can't kind of pop into everyone's living room while they're listening to your record and be like, the thing where you're kind of meant to do with this bit was this is supposed to be this. The records have to stand on their own 2 feet, and they are going to do that. And one of the things you learn is that it's just how divorced from the material that you make you end up feeling when it's actually out there. Like if I consider Go now, I don't feel like I really had anything to do with that song. And when we're playing it live, watching how some people, the crowds react to it, I'm just like, wow, this is great. But I don't feel, yeah, it doesn't feel like it's mine to take any credit from necessarily, because it's just kind of out there doing its own thing. And the music is kind of, the audience and the music are connecting in ways that you have no possible knowledge of and no control over. So you just kind of got to let it go off and do its thing. And sometimes, really quite magical things happen, like with songs like Go. They just get taken on board by people and become part of the fabric of their lives in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine. So yeah, it's great. But yeah, you can't. It's not my job to kind of explain everything to everyone. The record has to do that in and of itself, I think.
How does that feel? I mean, you pretty much touched on it, but it must be like a 50-50 with a song like Go to, like you say, be kind of disconnected from it because it is everyone else's now and it has gone stratospheric, so to speak. And even when we were at Night and Day, we saw people. I appreciate people won't be able to see this from a listener perspective, but people, with fingers in the air. And
Yeah.
it was just like, it was such a reaction in the room. But as you say, it's kind of, you're disconnected from it in a sense because it has gone on to become such a big thing. That must feel strange as an artist in one sense, but also just, yeah, like you say, something you just have to let go.
Yeah, I mean, it's lovely. It's great watching people, having a great time to the music that you're playing. But it's just strange. It's strange how you would think writing each record would get easier if you've had moments like that. If you've been lucky to have a few songs that do connect with people, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know what I'm doing. This is fine. But those songs end up actually weighing on you a lot more heavily because you have all the kind of responsibility of living up to them in terms of producing something that memorable, but you don't feel that you had anything to do with producing them in the first place. So you're like, how can I possibly do that again? It's such a weird trick that your brain plays on itself. And I know it's not just me as well, because I've heard Brian Eno talking about this on the Buxton podcast. And yeah, once you kind of put a song out there and it's released, it genuinely, it sounds like a kind of pretentious arty thing to say it doesn't belong to you anymore, but it really doesn't. And to the extent that it can seem like a kind of weight on your shoulders in terms of trying to write the next thing, because you have no concept of how you came to make that thing that worked. How do you do that again? I don't know. Just got really lucky with one. It's funny.
I suppose you could always do Go too, but it is
Yeah.
it is interesting hearing people like Eno say stuff like that because everything he touches seems to turn to gold. But I did hear something. I say I heard it when we interviewed French artist Halo Maud. She said, sometimes with songs, it's almost like you're plucking it out of the sky, and it's not a case of, even though all the hard graft that goes into it, it is kind of like you can be so lucky with something.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the great things about Get Back, the documentary, was it gave people who aren't in bands and who aren't writing music a chance to just see it happen. And it's such a kind of prosaic moment. It's just like, mucking around in rehearsal studio, mucking around on the guitar, blah, blah, blah. Oh, I like that. Oh, what's that? Da, 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 da. And bang, he's written Get Back out of nowhere. How did he do that? What kind of magic happened in that
Yeah.
room to let that happen? It's and it does happen. It happened with Go to a much lesser extent. I'm not trying to say it's as good as Get Back, but it happened. It just kind of, it was just, I just played it. It was there. It wrote itself extremely quickly, and I knew straight away that it was, one of the strongest things I'd written, and I was very confident that it would connect with people. But you can never know for sure. But I was very confident. But yeah, I don't know what various elements kind of coalesced that day to make that happen. But you just got to put yourself in a position as a writer where you can catch as many of them as possible. So always recording stuff and always kind of working and just trying 10 minutes of this every day, and all these things you're supposed to do that I do none of. Kind of just trying to facilitate happy accidents. And I think that's Brian Eno's whole career almost seems to have been, the oblique strategies. It's kind of just kind of getting yourself out of the way and just kind of trying to make these happy accidents, keep your ears open and keep interrogating the ideas, and before you know it, something magical might happen. Yeah, you just got to keep plugging away, really, keep turning up.
And similar to what I imagine it was like when you were writing Go, the best thing about that, which we've talked about on this podcast before, is the fact that when McCartney was doing that in the studio, Ringo and George just looked bored to tears because it was studio time and it was, this tension and such. So I'm sure even they didn't know what was cooking.
No, I think you can hear that there's promise in it, but that, they've used to McCartney as well. They'll have seen that happen a lot because he was lucky to write a lot of extraordinary melodies and a lot of extraordinary songs. Yeah, there's something about getting the germ of an idea like that, and you can kind of hear where you want to go with it in your head, and knowing that you've got something good and you are hopefully going to make it better and make it into a complete thing it's a really nice feeling. Yeah, you do get occasionally once in a while.
I can't wait to see the headline that you've compared yourselves to Get Back, McCartney and Beatles era.
Yeah, Willgoose slags off the Archers and says he's as good as McCartney.
Cancelled by the morning.
Yeah. Oh dear.
So, yeah, with the new record, as well as wanting to focus on a woman-focused story, I thought it was great as well that, as you have done previously, you've featured a number of guest artists, including a number of female vocalists. So I was chuffed up to see This Is the Kit appear on the record, but also you've got Era, I think that's how you pronounce it, who's performed with you live and such. And when we did see you live at Night and Day Cafe, she got an incredible reaction. And, her pieces on the record, as well as all the other vocalists on the record, are fantastic. You've previously had the opportunity as well to work with James Dean Bradfield and a host of other artists and musicians. Have you any wish list names for future projects or anything that you might want to touch on? Do you think you might return to artists you worked with before?
I think it's really helpful. It was really helpful with Andreya and Era to have those kind of existing relationships, and just to be able to say, here's the kind of thing we're hoping to kind of get across with this song. Here's some of the material I've been reading. Here's what the song needs to be about and kind of the function it needs to serve on the record. Have a kind of pre-existing relationship where you can just trust that that's gonna work because it worked before, and not have to kind of go through all the the rigmarole of getting to know somebody virtually or online or whatever, and sort of dancing around each other a bit and being too polite. We could actually just be like, no, that's not working. Let's try this. And not put anybody's nose out of joint. But it's nice to get some new voices in there as well. And yeah, Kate was amazing. She just kind of, I sent her the barest bits of inspiration and kind of focus, and she just turned in what she turned in, almost note for note as it is on the final song. Yeah, she was fantastic. Yeah, and we've had that before with other people as well. I think, I grew up listening to the Manics, and they were such an important band for me that working with James was a bit more kind of he would chastise me for saying it, but it was a bit more like just challenging in terms of having to remind myself that we were working together as peers and not, oh my God, it's James Dean Bradfield singing on one of our songs. He doesn't want to be treated like that because that's extremely boring for him, and that's what he gets from fans probably most days of his life. He wants to be just, in a room with other musicians and just making music. So that was the biggest challenge of that, really. Yeah, it's nice though to have a blend of kind of people you worked with before and have kind of a common language with, and also people who can step in and kind of take the record in other ways that you've not kind of had before. And I think what Kate did is definitely something we've not had before on a record. It's just the way that she inhabits a melody. It's a very distinctive style that she has, and I think it worked really well on that track.
Yeah. In terms of allowing you to fanboy a bit, you supported the Manics last year, as we said. Was that kind of a nuts moment from, going from the period before you were in public service broadcasting and, like you say, were playing these rooms to no one and such, to then go on and play Trentham Gardens of all places with the Manics. That must have been nuts.
We've been lucky enough to play with them, several times now over a number of years. And the amount of support that they've shown to us and the amount of kind of faith that they've placed in us is really, yeah, that beggars belief, to be honest, coming from where I came from as a fan first and foremost. And I just remember walking home from school almost every day listening to the Holy Bible or listening to Motorcycle Emptiness. And the first time we got asked to support them was in then Colston Hall in Bristol. Just walking in there, they were sound checking with Motorcycle Emptiness. It was like, this genuinely can't be happening. This is a very strange thing to happen. Yeah. And they were all so friendly and lovely and warm and supportive, and also clearly still like people with a ferocious kind of intellect. And I mean ferocious. I wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of them in an argument. They still really care so much about what they do, and they're still so like culturally engaged. I think they're kind of a blueprint really for bands in terms of how to kind of go into album 12, 13, 14 and still have something to say. But yeah, it was a head spinner, which is one of the reasons why working with James was a challenge in some respects. But I think I managed to finally just come to terms with it and just get on with it. You got no choice really. Yeah.
It'd be a different dynamic if every time he came in to do anything with you in future projects and such, you were still that teenage boy, wouldn't it?
It would, yes. I don't think he would like that.
Stop answering phone calls.
Yeah.
I'm just interested what you said previously about one of the previous records in terms of, you didn't want to be vampiric about it. You wanted to dive headfirst in and live it, so to speak. How far do you go into the research as a writer and as a band on projects? And is there ever any, deadline for something? I appreciate when you were doing your massive piece with the orchestra last year. I think it was last year that, obviously that will have time frames for when the live show is. But with concept records and such, do you ever have to give yourself like a period for how long you can go into that period of research and writing?
Yeah, I think you have to be quite disciplined about it because, as a band of our size, we can't really, we can't do what Radiohead do and just have like 10 years between records and just vanish. We're a working band and we need to release stuff and kind of tour and, keep trying to make it financially viable for 4 people to live off. Not necessarily all of them full time, but, enough to make it work for us all, and management on top of that. So yeah, you have to be pretty disciplined. And one of the other things that COVID has done is it's thrown everything kind of into reverse really. So we had to book the tour for this album. The main tour was in October 24. We were talking about booking it in August 2023 when I'd written 2 and a bit songs. So you're booking the tour for October, which means that you're going to have to release 2 or 3 weeks at least before then, which means you're going to have to deliver it probably 4 months before that, which means you're going to have to master it a month before that, which means you're going to have to mix it, blah blah blah. You're going to have to record this in January, and it's basically all because venues are so booked up, especially the bigger ones in London and places like Manchester, Glasgow. We were 14 months out from the Roundhouse date that we ended up booking, and they call it second pencil for a Tuesday night in October. So it's not even like one of the more in-demand nights where you get 4 or 5 people fighting for a Friday or a Saturday night. It was Tuesday night, and we're booking that well over a year in advance. Brixton being out of action doesn't help either because that has a knock-on effect for larger venues in London, but everything kind of follows on from that. So, the album had to be finished by the start of May, had to come out before October, so there was no choice, just had to get it done. And I think this was probably the quickest I've worked to get that done. I knew I just had to do it. It does have a kind of a bit of a price in terms of, work-life balance and family life and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's just got no choice really. Like I say, we're not in a position to delay releases by 6 months and just be like, oh, that's fine, because if you lose those tour dates, you're looking at another year before you can book some more. So we just have to get on with it, and it's going to be the same, I'm sure. If we want to release a record in, say, January, February 2027, which is 2 years away, I need to start writing it this summer essentially. So I need to be researching it now. So I do not feel ready to do that, but I know I'm going to have to do it because we just don't have a choice. There's no other way of doing it.
That is a crazy thought that, yeah, I suppose once you've sorted out tea time for the kids tonight, your brain's thinking about what to do next.
I've started like the low key level research for the next one. So I've read a book and a half and watched a couple of things and just kind of getting my head in the right space to start imagining sounds and themes and so forth. But yeah, it feels early to be thinking about it, definitely.
I do like that you started off with the concept with the band of, kind of teaching lessons of the past through music of the future.
Yeah, I mean that was very tongue in cheek. It was never intended to be taken literally. I wrote that as a snappy line to try and promote the show at Edinburgh for the Fringe that I went up for one year, and it is a good line, and it's just followed us around forever ever since. But yeah, we we're not going to give people a quiz at the end of a gig or anything. We're not putting ourselves in a position where we're like, we know so much about this. Let's tell you, it's never meant to be taken in that way. But yeah, I can see why some people would think it's a bit big-headed, but it was purely meant as a kind of tongue-in-cheek, very English kind of humour.
Oh no, I was
Yeah,
coming at it from totally the different way. I thought it was a really good, like you say, it's a really good line, isn't it? Particularly, yeah, for what
yeah,
the purpose of building, press up and what have you. I do
yeah. I
think
mean, it's catchy, it's nonsense, so it
Yeah.
works. Yeah.
I do think though you're missing a trick by not having a quiz at the end of every show.
Well, I could give one to Wrigglesworth, and I know he would not do very well in it, so maybe I'll just do that instead.
But on that topic, obviously you said you've already started the groundwork, so to speak, in terms of what the next record could be. Have you given like, much overarching thought to a specific concept? Is there multiple irons in the fire or
Yeah, I'm still in the process of testing the idea really. So it's got to the stage where I think I can I think I know what it is, and I can picture an album cover, and I can picture the rough kind of sound, maybe even a couple of song titles based off what I've been researching. But I'm still poking it and just being like, is that going to work? Could you do that? What about this? Have you thought about this? Is it not a better time to try something like that? But eventually it's going to be too late. I'm just going to be too much into it to reverse. So yeah, just going to have to start writing it. We'll see what happens.
have you ever been in a position where you've gotten to that point where you've read the books and you've watched the films and listened to the audio and said, actually, this isn't going to work? Or again, is it a case of you have to be,
Well, I almost thought we were in that position with the Last Flight, because I thought when I started the whole process that the book that she'd written called Last Flight, I thought it was out of copyright because she wrote it in 37 and died, officially died in 39, registered legally dead. So I was like, well, that's more than 75 years. We're good. Then found out due to the vagaries of copyright law in a certain specific period in the US, it wasn't out of copyright and won't be until 2027. And then I thought, oh well, that's it. I'm done. We can't use the book. That was going to be the basis of the whole thing for me. But then I just had to think laterally, really. I was like, well, what can we use from the time that's copyright free? Well, there's her first two books that she wrote, which came out earlier. So there's The Fun of It, which ended up on the record. And, there's How Marvelous is a Machine and the Mind That Made It is the line that goes into Electra. That's from her first book about crossing the Atlantic in the Friendship. You can use quoted speech from newspapers. You can use other things that have lapsed into copyright. You can kind of use your imagination to write around things and kind of change wordings of things so that you're getting the same kind of ideas across, but not necessarily word for word. But I just felt too deeply invested in the idea of making this record about this part of her life to just be like, oh, I can't use that. Game over. I just had to think laterally and just be determined enough to think, well, I'm just going to do it. I'll find a way of doing it, and I'm glad that I did. Yeah, but it was not a very nice week or two of just sort of fretting about it all. One of the few things we could use from it is chapter titles, because you can't copyright chapter titles. Apparently, they're too short. So a lot of the song titles on the record are taken from the book because they're pretty much the only bit we could use. So yeah.
stick it to the copyright bods, even if you can't?
Well, I mean, in all actuality, nobody probably cares, and the likelihood of somebody coming after you for using a book that's going to expire in 2 years anyway, and that is not in print, as far as I can tell, is pretty low. But I know what my brain is like. I don't want to take those kind of risks because I know I'll just be fretting when it comes out that we're going to get rumbled and someone's going to steal my house. But yeah, so we do things properly, and then I can stop worrying about it. Worry about everything else instead.
The worst part about that was when you said it was 2 years ago, away rather. I thought, but 2027's in 5 years. Oh, right, okay.
Yeah.
Dreadful.
Yeah, that's life. Quicker every year.